And thank you once again for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cunningham, for joining us. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page. I know that you signed up when you first signed up for math. It was just a math PD, but I wanted to make sure we can try and bring something that was whatever was most interested. And so we throw out the survey, and lo and behold, the two most, sorry, give me a moment, pulling people in. The two most sought after topics were both problem solving and rich tasks, or the idea of tasks. And so I figured, okay, we can try to lump those together and make sure we bring you what you had asked for. But at the same time, I really want to be clear, if there was something that you're wanting that we're not covering today, please let me know. I was working with a teacher the other day and she was like, oh, I wanted a PhD on this. I said, I can come and share whatever you might be interested in. Doesn't mean I always have the answers, but I'd be happy to be able to share what I know, or at least resources that I may be aware of. So want to make sure you understand it's not just whatever it is our topic for today. So let's go ahead and dive in. Wrong direction, hold on. So we had a clip here and I thought this was perfect to what our topic is, which is, again, problem solving. So I'm going to play this for you and I'll let you go ahead and answer those two questions when we're finished watching this clip, which is to say, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And if you feel more comfortable placing your responses in the chat, by all means. But when our clip is done, if you want to unmute and just share out, that'd be great as well.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's nothing else left to do, is it?
So it goes on for a few more minutes, but I think that's enough. So would anyone be like to, either with the chat or with your unmuting and sharing out, what are some things you noticed there and some things you might be wondering? No reasoning. Thank you, Kelly. Yes. Cannot problem solve. I'd agree with that statement. We have individuals attempted to problem solve, neither of them know. So caught up in the problem, can't find the answer. Sign of the times. So many things. And I think that this is, to me at least, when I saw this, resonated with me because it's the idea of what usually happens when our kiddos encounter problems, right? If kiddos are working on something and they don't know how to solve something, or maybe it's something that's unfamiliar to them, their first thing and first instinct might be to ask you immediately for help. You're the teacher, you're the person with all the knowledge in the room, help me, I'm stuck. But I think that that's what we really want to make sure kiddos understand. That problem solving is something that they're gonna have to encounter, and that's something they're gonna have to work themselves out of. It's all about getting stuck and at the same time getting unstuck. Kiddos would probably look at this, and just like many of you were thinking, as I'm thinking when I first saw this clip, like, just walk, it's literally an escalator. But that's not necessarily what always presents itself. So I think that this is a good way for us to kind of start off our conversation, and at the same time acknowledge, like, it can be tough. Sometimes the path isn't right in front of us and we may be unsure how to proceed, but at the same time, we have to be willing and understanding that we're gonna get stuck sometimes. Thank you for those of you that placed your responses in the chat, appreciate it. Oh, we don't want to play that again. Let's see if we can get to the next slide. So our goals, what are we trying to accomplish in our brief time together? First and foremost, I want to identify what is a task. We want to look at some problem solving strategies. And then I'd like to, if time permits, be able to make a task, but at the very least, show you where some tasks already are available so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. So those are our goals that we're going to try to accomplish in our time together. First thing is the task. I think when I pose this question and I ask people, like, what do you consider to be a task? And a lot of times people might throw out, it has to be a word problem. And yes, a lot of times tasks are word problems, but they aren't always just that. I think a task really simply, and I even Googled it because I wanted to make sure my answers aren't just what I'm thinking. Essentially, it's just an activity that students are working on while they're doing math. So it could be a word problem, it could be other things. It doesn't always have to be. Now, I kind of took it a step further and I said, well, we want to make sure we're not just giving our students access to tasks, but we want to make sure we're making them as rich as possible. And so I looked around the web, found some different ideas, and I thought this really worked well for what we're trying to do. Now, for those of you that know, we are in our district really having a focus on the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, or NPDL. And I think that when you consider these things with regards to math, we are addressing those particular things within this right here. So the first thing they talk about with regards to a task is that it's accessible. It should have multiple entry points and a lot of different places for our kiddos to get into the conversation, or at least get into the activity that we're working on. You want to encourage multiple approaches. There shouldn't always just be one way of going about it. I know I remember going into one group of a classroom with students, and all the kiddos solved the problem the same way. And afterwards we talked to the teacher and we said, do you think that was great? And she's like, well, yeah, that's of course. They all were doing what I showed them to do. And I would say, I think that there's a lot of power when kiddos have different strategies because it's their different way of looking at it. Our role should be to be able to make some of those connections in and amongst those varied strategies. Collaboration and discussion. Yesterday, for those of us that maybe were privy to attending the Workman Quad math session we had, we talked in depth all about the importance of discussion and collaboration. And those, again, are terminologies that come to us from NPD as well when we think about the 6 C's. And then the last one, we want to make sure our kiddos are curious and that they're creative. When I think about math problems, kids are going to approach it different ways. They see things differently. They're going to be very creative with how they approach and solve different problems. So again, this is just a list. They came to us from one of the Heinemann blogs I found out there, but there's tons of things. And it's funny because you'll start to see a lot of overlap in terms of the different platforms or different people all talking about what makes a rich task. So you may have seen this video before, but I think it really grounds our conversation. And so this video that we're going to play for us is really highlighting, looking at students and their response to a particular word problem. Now, you'll see as we read this problem that it isn't actually solvable. But what we're trying to see is how many students. So they look at about 32 students. And so before I even play it, I'd like you to be mindful, if you don't already recall, how many of those 32 or about 30 students would actually make sense of this word problem versus how many of the students of those approximately 30 students aren't going to make sense. And so again, is this something that they could actually solve? It is not, but it'll be interesting to see how many of those approximately 30 students are or aren't able to make sense. So before I even click play, you don't need to put it in the chat. Just think, pick a number in your mind. How many of 30 students do you think, roughly, right, would actually make sense of this math problem? And then we'll play and we'll see how close were you. And those are middle schoolers, by the way, answering this question.
There are 125 sheep and 5 dogs in a flock. How old is the shepherd?
What? There are 125 sheep and 5 dogs in the flock. How old is a shepherd? I don't know how to solve this.
Why is that?
Because it doesn't talk about anything about the shepherd. Like, it doesn't say how old, like how long he's had them or anything. So like, it doesn't give me any hints about anything. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are 125 sheep and 5 dogs in a flock. How old is the shepherd?
$120 years old.
How do you know it's 120? Can you please write down here? Now, how do you know that the shepherd is 120 years old?
Because I subtracted 125 minus the 5 dogs in a flock.
Okay, thank you very much.
That could be it.
Thank you. Can you tell me, how did he know to divide?
Because it doesn't say the difference, or it doesn't say the sum, or the project, or something.
I see. Okay, thank you very much.
So for whatever reason, we can see that it is seriously something that we know, right, is a reality in our classrooms. And this is, again, with 8th grade students. So this doesn't mean this is my purpose behind showing you this is for us to kind of bring down or to bring a smile or a laugh. It's really to understand that, hey, this is something that we need to address, and what are we doing to be able to help our kiddos better make sense of the math. And so let's go ahead and dive further in. So I look at it through the lens of like, what is happening right now in many classrooms, right? Not to say that things that are going there aren't working, but I think of like, how do we say we help kiddos make sense? And a lot of times when we think about the strategies that are being implemented today, usually center around things like this. So this is one of the more popular one I've seen. Maybe you use it in your own classroom, which is the idea of cubes. And so to make sure we're all on the same page, essentially students are being asked to do these various different steps. They're circling numbers, they're underlining the question, they're boxing any action words. And I don't know if you caught that yet, then that last segment over there, but that little girl who was trying to explain her rationale. Here's why I did this division. It didn't say sum. It didn't say difference. So they're looking for those action words. And when those action words are there, what do? Some operation that whatever they feel most comfortable in. So it's not to say that cubes is a terrible strategy. It's just that I find it becomes very difficult to identify what are action words, rather than us trying to make sense of the situation and ask ourselves, what is actually happening here? Do I have enough information to be able to move forward with solving this particular problem? This is something that I actually thought that I was helping my students with. So I had posters up on the wall. I had them in the different areas of the room, and those were the key words that my students knew that when they were looking for answers in terms of what do I need to do for a problem, they would refer back to those posters and they'd look, oh, okay, I'm looking for this word. There's the word. This is what I know I need to do. And I thought that I was doing a really good thing because, again, I was trying to add to my print-rich environment. I was giving them a resource, something they could lean into when they got stuck. I was looking and I saw another thing over there on the web. Obviously, the internet has a lot of things out there for us. And they had this thing, almost the idea that we could kind of have like a cheat code for math, that you are cracking this math code, that when you see these words, this is in essence what needs to happen. But this doesn't always work, right? So we look at this sample word problem, and I'll go ahead and read it for us. It says hot dog buns come in packages of 8. Michael buys 6 packages of hot dog buns. How many hot dog buns does Michael have in all? So students are looking at this, they're trying to say, what are those action words? What are those things that I need to find? They look at that cheat code and they see, there are words there, there are. In fact, I see in all, therefore I know that I must be adding. Of course, I added both those quantities and I get 14. And then we have to break the bad news to them that guess what? You used the code, you did what I said, but at the same time, it's not right. And this is how they respond to us. And it's the idea that if we're following these procedures when I'm problem solving, I should be able to eventually get the right answer. And ultimately, we have to go with the idea that you can't essentially work on just proceduralizing when you're trying to work on problem solving. Students have to be able to have opportunities to make sense. Now that was one, this is another one that I've seen in a lot of other classrooms, whether it be Price or Rice, similar ideas. And in essence, they're asking students to follow steps to be able to provide an answer. This is not something that's most common, but I did find it there, and that's U-pose. So somebody that had a really strong drive towards the idea of us trying to do different poses in yoga and being able to see it's the same process, same idea, right? Kids are following these steps, and by doing that, they're going to arrive at a correct answer. But that's not essentially the way it works. Now, will these in the short term give you results? Yes, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that if a kiddo follows these steps, that it will work in a lot of cases, but it will not work in all cases. One of the things that I think about with my own kiddo is my daughter. She's a 4th grader at a different school, not in our district. And she came home and she was like, Dad, I got this problem marked wrong. And I was like, oh, well, tell me what was it about? And she explained it to me. I said, well, sounds like you understood the problem. You made sense of it. Why'd you get it marked down? She's like, oh, I didn't use the cube strategy my teacher told me I had to use. And I said, oh, okay. Did you make sense of the problem? She said, yes, but I didn't use the strategy. And I explained to her that I appreciate her making sense of the problem. And that for me, at least as a parent, that means more to me than her following these steps. I understand that it's well-intentioned. That's not to say that it's not, but I think that first and foremost, our kiddos and our students need to make sense of whatever the context of the situation is. I even came up with my own little one here, which is following the steps, step 1, step 2, step 3. And it's really just this. It says, please have our kiddos make sense of the math rather than giving them these steps to be able to produce an answer. So I know it's tough, and I know it seems kind of silly, like maybe this is something you've been doing or that you really cling to. What I will say is this: if the math practice 1 is calling us to make sense of the math, simply looking for certain words is not necessarily having us do that. So if that isn't what we're looking at, what are some other possible things, right? Can't just be, can't do this. What can I do? So let's go ahead and do a problem together. Yes, thank you, Monica. Absolutely, we're going to talk about that. So here we go. Let me read this problem. It says, there were some deer walking through the forest. 5 more deer joined them. Then there were 9 deer altogether. So let's just ask this question. I mean, Monica or anyone else in the room can chime in. Start focusing on the context. What is happening in this problem? What's going on? What do we know in terms of happening? What is it about? It's not about hot dogs. Anyone want to go ahead and unmute, or feel free in the chat if you feel more comfortable. The question is, again, what are we talking about in this particular problem? Thank you. Wait's on. Appreciate it. So someone says you're finding the missing number. That's great in terms of what we're trying to do. I'm simply keeping it at what is it talking about in this problem. And so could anyone chime in with what's the context? What's the situation? We're talking about deer. Fantastic. We're talking about deer. And then we say, oh, okay. That was the first time we read the problem. Deer walking in the forest, taking it a step further. Thank you, Ms. Metz. So we know that we're talking about deer. We know that they're walking in this forest. Great. Let's go ahead and read it again. So there were some deer walking through the forest. 5 more deer joined them. Then there were 9 deer altogether. So let's now say, do we know how many deer there were when we first started? Do we know? We say, well, no. How do we not know? Because it says some deer. It doesn't tell me how many deer were there in the forest. What happened after some deer walk in the forest? Oh, 5 deer joined them. So now more deer are coming to the party. We understand that there was some walking, and then some more came out there. Now, what else do we know in terms of numbers? It says there were 9 deer altogether. So is 9 the deer that joined them? Are 9 the deer that they started off with? What is 9 in this particular problem? And so anyone as teachers, I'm sure you could tell me 9 is what in our problem? Like I said, if you feel more comfortable in muting, by all means, it's a small group. Someone says the sum, beautiful. So 9 is how much we're talking about after more deer join them. Fantastic. And so then we say, oh, cool, what's a math question that they could ask us? Because I noticed there's a lot of information, but there isn't necessarily a question. There's nothing that I need to do yet. So we ask our students, what's a math question that we might ask? And so go ahead and tell me, what is a math question you could ask or the problem could ask of us? Anyone have the exact question they might be asked? I know when I've done this with students, believe it or not, they'll start to tell me what I need to do to answer the question. I'm simply asking, what math question could they ask us? Not the operation, not you need to do this, not you need to do that. It's what math question might they ask us in this problem? How many are in the forest? There you go. So let's just see, what is our question going to be? How many deer were there to start with? And now I make sure my students understand. We'd read the problem an entire 3rd time, and then I give them opportunities to go ahead and work on this. So this that we just did is what, let me make sure I got the name right, is what Monica had talked about, which is to say, Ms. Rodriguez is saying the 3-read protocol. This is what I say is the closest to close reading and literacy that we have in math. We're looking at the problem 3 different times, and each time we have a different purpose, a different why. Three-read protocol is just this. The first focus or the first read, we're looking at the situation. What are we talking about? We can't start digging into the math unless we first made sense of the situation. One of the most important things we talk about in math is the idea that there's context. Context matters, and that's going to dictate what we're talking about and what we're trying to do. It's also relatable for kiddos. If it were just looking at a problem where it was add these numbers, or this number plus this number minus this number, it's not as much of a story. I'm not vested as much in it. So this, again, first situation, what's it about? Or first read, sorry. Second read, what are the quantities? And making sure we make connections to what those quantities are. This 9, or in this case 5, relates to what? 5 was the deer that were walking, or that joined the group initially. 9 is what we ended up with. So you want to make sure you're addressing what the quantities are and how they relate. And then the last one, which is really great, which is what mathematical questions can we ask? Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. She put in there a 3 protocol for kindergarten. I don't know that it's, oh, San Francisco Unified. Yes. Yes, San Francisco Unified is the first district that I've read about that was using the 3 protocol, and it's fantastic. It's been in countless other articles and a lot of different praise around this really works, and this is a great strategy to help promote sense making with our students. So this is a 3-read protocol. There are also handouts that are on the math website, which we'll show later. But Mrs. Rodriguez already shared the link there. If you want to click on that, maybe save that as well. Any questions with regards to the 3 protocol? All right. So similar to that, we're going to look at a different problem and a different strategy. And so let me go ahead and see if I can get to the next slide here. 52 ladybugs were crawling around in the garden. 56 more ladybugs joined them. How many ladybugs were in the garden altogether? And what oftentimes happens is just this. Our students hone in on the quantity. So in this case, 52, 56, and I'm doing something with those problems. Just like we saw in the video, I'm adding, I'm dividing, I'm multiplying. It's whatever probably is I'm most recently learning, or what I feel most comfortable doing is what I'm going to do. So the students kind of, if you will, are zoning everything out and excluding everything and focusing on the numbers. And oftentimes what happens is they pull those numbers out and they never go back to the context whatsoever. There's a reason why context matters, and it's why it's really helpful for kiddos to better understand the math. We want to make sure that's still an emphasis in what we are doing. So rather than keep the problem as it currently stands, we're going to scaffold or chunk it out for our kiddos. So let's look at the same problem, but experience it in a slightly different manner. So some ladybugs were crawling around in the garden. Some more ladybugs joined them. So I asked students, and I ask you the same, picture in your mind, almost as if it were a movie or a story reading. What is happening? What are you imagining going on so far as I read the scenario? Some ladybugs were crawling around in the forest, or garden, sorry. Some more ladybugs joined them. And then I asked kiddos, it's just like we did with the 3 reads. What are we talking about here? Not what operation needs to happen, not what I need to do to answer this question, just what are we talking about? Y'all are funny, you must be tired talking all day. I was like, no one wants to unmute and share out. That's okay, choice is important. Ladybugs, there you go. We're just talking about ladybugs, and we can ask more, what do we know about the ladybugs? Oh, okay. Whoa, wait a minute. Do we know how many ladybugs are here? And some of the kids are gonna throw out numbers because they will. And I say, well, are we sure? Let's go back. What does it say? Some ladybugs. Whoa, how many do you think could be out there? And kids might throw out some different numbers. Wow, all right, awesome. I'm gonna take it a step further. 52 ladybugs were crawling around in the garden. Some more ladybugs joined them. We say, oh, and the kids are like, oh my gosh. And so what happened? What changed? What new information do we have now that we didn't have a few moments ago? And so I know I don't need you to put it in the chat. We can see, right? Now we know how many ladybugs. Now it says 52. Are those the ladybugs that joined them? Or are those the ladybugs that were already in the garden? We have that conversation with the class. So the big idea is that we're trying to first make sense of what is it talking about? That's the context. The next step is scaffold or chunking out the parts. Right now, we're looking at how many were in the garden. How many more do you think joined them? Could it be more than 52? Could it be less than 52? We know that we started with 52. How many do you think might be there? And students might chime in with their different amounts. But here, they're starting to imagine and understand the scenario that's playing out. So here we go. 52 ladybugs were crawling around in the garden. 56 more joined them. So now what changed here? Now we know how many more ladybugs joined them. So we started with 52. We know that 56 more joined them crawling around, but we still don't have a math question. And this is one of the things that's really important. Students should have opportunities to come up with their own word problems. And if they can, at least start here, which is to say, if they can at least provide what is the question that could be asked in these situations, they're going to have a tough time producing an entire word problem in itself. We talk about story structure, whether we're talking about a narrative or whether we're talking about expository text, that still matters here with regards to story problems. Kiddos need to understand that there's some information coming to me and then a question given to me about that information. Now, when I ask this to students almost all the time, especially in the early goings of them trying this routine or this strategy, they're going to tell me, oh, it could ask us to add, it could ask us to subtract. Those are operations. Thank you for being brave and offering up your thoughts. I'm asking just what math question could they ask us? And so, of course, math question they could ask us, they could say, how many ladybugs were there in all? They could even ask us how many more ladybugs joined them versus that. So there's some different questions that could be there. But in this case, we're talking about how many ladybugs were in the garden altogether. Now, before I give kiddos a chance for them to work and address tackling this word problem or the story problem, it's really important that we understand they need to know the question. That doesn't mean they need to know what to do, but they need to know what is being asked of them. Because what we don't want to do is give them a problem, let them go work on stuff, and they're answering things that we're not even being asked. So it's really important that we have opportunities for them to be able to engage in what is the question that could be asked of me given this information. Let's see, I usually document the questions. Yeah, absolutely, I love it. Writing the questions that they produce is a fantastic strategy that you could do. And then sometimes I've even done this before where, there's questions that multiple questions potentially that could be answered. And I give them the choice, go ahead and answer some of these different questions. But typically, more often than not, there's already a question that I have in my mind or a question that's already a part of the slide presentation. And that's what I have them work on. But I think it's important for them to have that opportunity to formulate what might be asked given the context. So again, this was a numberless word problem. It was layered, it was scaffolded. It was slow revealed, chunked out, if you will. And I think this goes a long way to helping not only our English language learners, but a lot of our kids that are trying to process and make sense of all the stuff that's coming their way. It begins without numbers to foster context. I know it sounds silly, like how can a math problem have no numbers? Again, we're going back to what is making sense. What is this talking about before we jump into trying to do something with it? Numbers are slowly introduced. I've seen this varied, right? There's different ways you can do it. You don't need to have each quantity revealed with each sum. Sometimes I've seen it where there's no numbers and then the next slide or the next version of it automatically has all the quantities. I do feel that you have to read your students and know, are they able to process it more quickly or do they need longer time, in which case scaffold it out. So if we're talking about, here's a word problem, how many slides would you have? More often than not, like I said, 3 to 4 layers there. And then the question stem, I think that's one of the biggest things. And you see that overlap both with here as well as a 3-read protocol. Removing the question stem really helps foster the need for sense making of what is going on before I'm jumping into what I need to do to address this particular problem. So I've talked at you quite a bit. I want to give you some time for you to be able to make some conversation with colleagues. And so I'm going to open up some rooms. Here's what I want you to do. Rather than me assigning to you rooms, we tried this successfully yesterday. We'll just give you some choice in terms of which room you select. But to keep it balanced, this is what I have in terms of your last name. If you want to look at it A through L, M through Z, I think we have enough here that we could be able to balance those rooms out. So I'm going to give you these rooms. And if your last name was, for example, A through L and you were TK, you choose room 5. I only had a few people sign up for TK, so I put you both in one room. But for kinder, first and second, I saw that there was more than a few. So I thought it might be better for us to have 2 rooms for those particular teachers. So when you get to that room, what do I want you to talk about? Because it could be tons of things, but I want to keep us focused and driving in the same direction. And so I have these 2 questions. How to do strategy shared support sense making? Because we're talking about kiddos making sense of the math. And the second question, which is a bit more cumbersome, a little more parts to it, which is how might you communicate to students your expectations for reasoning, for critical thinking, and collaboration while they're working on problem solving? So again, those are our 2 questions. How do the strategies support sense making? And a step further, how do you communicate your expectations for reasoning, critical thinking, and collaboration while problem solving? So I'm going to go in and open up those rooms. While you're there, I'll put in the chat where I'll send out a message to everyone with what these questions are, just to remind you in case you forget. Thank you for your engagement, because again, what you bring and what you contribute is going to make the difference in terms of what you and your colleagues take out of your time together. Let's see. That's all right. Well, I hope you had some good conversations and at least got some good ideas from colleagues. Thank you for your engagement during sharing out. So I think that ultimately, right, maybe when you selected problem solving, or at least when you thought of the idea, and this happens to many of us, we think about like wanting to find that perfect thing, that silver bullet that will address problem solving. And the reality is that there isn't necessarily a one shoe fits all. There isn't necessarily a do this and amazingly your students will be better problem solvers. Ultimately, when we think about us trying to tackle word problems, I think we need to create that space. We need to create that environment for kiddos to be engaged in the sense making themselves. There isn't something where you can say, do this and you're going to be a better problem solver. Just like everything else that requires you to do it multiple times, you have to be engaged in the opportunities to be a problem solver for you to be better at problem solving. Now, I think about how we looked at that first thing when we started. That is something that I think that, you know, kiddos will look at that and say, it's super silly. Why wouldn't they just walk up a few steps? But sometimes when they're stuck, it's very hard to see what needs to happen. And so we want to make sure we're providing that space for kiddos to get stuck, but making sure they feel that it's a safe community, that I can still work through this, and that problem solving, what we're talking about here in math, isn't only isolated to just math. It's in everything that we do and everything that we approach. So what I wanted us to be able to do is do two things with our about 10 minutes left of our time together. First, I wanted us to be able to look at what are some resources that are already in existence so that you don't feel that you have to make it. But I do sometimes think, if I'm looking at whatever my lesson is, maybe it's chapter 3, lesson 2, or whatever chapter lesson you might be on tomorrow or the next day, right? I want you to be able to see how you might be able to use and create some of these word problems if you wanted to. So first, we're going to start off with looking at what is already there. And then I'll take us back here where you might be able to create your own in a very few minutes. You don't have to, but I think it's important to give that opportunity. So let me go ahead and stop my screen share for a brief moment, enter this, and then share. So what I'm doing right now at this time is I'm going over to the math website. And just so you can see, there's a lot of resources that are already made for you, especially at all grade levels, right? So I know we have transitional kindergarten teachers up in here. There are numberless word problems already made for you. So let me go ahead and share screen. Oops, fix this so you can see everything here. So here from the math website, and if you're wondering how do I get there, I can place it in the chat. But essentially any email I sent you, and I emailed almost all of you earlier today, any of the signatures that I have, essentially that link in the email signature will take you here as well. But now that you're here, you would go to TK12 instruction and then select your grade span. Earlier, we talked about the 3-read protocol. It's right there for right in our quick as soon as we get to the instructions. So if you want to click in or more there, but I'm going to click on our grade span TK2. And I'm going to scroll down to where we see tasks. Now, there's a lot of things here. The first thing that I was working with the teacher the other day, she said, I didn't even get any further than the very first part because there's a lot of really good websites that I either am using or starting to use. So I'm going to take it a step further. We're going down to tasks, and there's some tasks that you might use. So we have opening tasks, which is where you'll find some of the numberless word problems that we just kind of shared. You'll look at which one doesn't belong if you're wanting to use that first activity. If you happen to join us when we were starting to get into our time together, we had that one with the different things related to the most recent holiday that some people celebrate. And then we also have some same different activities. But I want to show you, for example, let's just say we were clicking in first grade and we were looking at, let's see, what might be a numberless word problem that I have already available to me. Let's see. Clicking on my chapter and I'm trying to see, is there a numberless word problem right there? That one has a lot of other routines, not a numberless word problem. Give me a second to go back. Actually, I think it was second grade that I saw that had one. So let me go back for a second. Click on second grade. I know they even had some that are outside of it. Let's see. Any one of these might be one. So let me click on the subtraction one. So here's the word problem if you want to look at it in isolation, but if you wanted a numberless word problem, I would not share that screen to my kiddos, but so that you know what you're looking at, and here's where it is. So Ms. Peck has some presents, Ms. Kim has some presents, Ms. Peck has 18 presents, Ms. Kiss some presents, and it goes all the way through, but it's already created so that you don't have to sit there and make a numberless word problem. If you wanted to already use them, they're already made. And for the most part, I'd say most chapters have one that's already produced that's relevant to whatever chapter you might be teaching. Not that it takes a lot of time to create these, but I do want to make sure you know it's already made for you if you wanted to use what was there. But sometimes I know we love creating things and we want to make sure it's relevant to what I want, so that one will show you how you can do that. So I'm going to go back to our presentation and I want to get a link that I want to share. And that is essentially a template. And with that template, it's going to ask you with Google for you to force copy. And you can be able to use that shell, if you will, to produce your own problem. So I'm going to go two things. I'm going to get that link. I'm going to share it in the chat. But I also want to make sure you know where I'm going to go. I'm going to go to Think Central or Go Math, since it's digital. I'm going to find what is the digital word problem that I could pull. And I'm going to create a numberless word problem using that template and using my curriculum. So let me go ahead and go back to my presentation. I'll stop for a second, pull together that link so that you can force copy it. Chat. So what I'm dropping in the chat right now, like I mentioned, is a template. You click on it, it should prompt you to force copy, and it's just a shell. There is absolutely no information outside of some guiding questions. If you heard along the way while we were doing those numberless word problems, there was questions I was asking as the teacher to kind of help guide the conversation. So those questions are already available to you in the speaker notes, if you will, of the slideshow. So that isn't something you show students, but rather it's for you. So I'm noticing some of you are clicking on that, you're opening it. I'm going to do the same so that I can have my own copy. Then I'll share my screen and we'll go from there. Second. Come on, link open for me. There it is. When I clicked on the link, sorry, it signed me out automatically. So I'm getting signed in. Thanks for your patience. Make a copy and I have it. And now I'm going to go over to Think Central. Let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see. So what I have here is my template that you probably opened yourself. You're looking at it and you're saying, like I mentioned, there isn't anything here. What are you talking about? We're going to draft it quickly together. So I'm going to come over to Think Central. So let me go ahead and do that. Put a new tab, Think Central, and I'm just looking for a problem that I might use. So what I noticed when I was going through this is, of course, if you're looking at the ebook version, whether it be the teacher copy or the student copy, or even the practice book version from Think Central, it doesn't allow you to highlight the text, copy and paste. So you could technically take it and type quickly and put that information in, but sometimes I'm lazy and I try to find more efficient ways. So if you came to the top, and I'm going to go in and click, let's say second grade, at-home learning support. Again, from the dashboard, I clicked at-home learning support. This was essentially drafted or created so that when kiddos were working remote during the height of the pandemic, they had access to PDF copies of the curriculum. So that's what we're looking at. Even though I clicked second grade, you can see we're looking at all grade levels. In fact, we'll just grab grade 1 since it's there in the middle. And it opens up essentially a PDF of your textbook. So it's not anything different. I'm going to go ahead and find, let's see, I'm looking for a problem that I might use. Sorry if this hurts your eyes as I'm scrolling. I'm trying to find a problem that I might take and pull and use. Here we go. That's probably not the best. Let's see if there's a problem solving right there. Those problem solvings aren't going to yet lend themselves to one. Let's see. It's talking all about place value here. It's not giving me context. I will get one. Thanks for your patience. Here we go. So I'm just highlighting that text, talking about Felix and his friends, and I'm going to come back to our prompts. There we go. And I'm going to paste that there. So there's the word problem that I have, right? Felix invites 15 friends to his party. Some friends are girls, 8 friends are boys. How many friends are girls? How could I take this and make it a numberless word problem? I'm going to take this information and I'm going to say, well, I don't want to have the quantities yet. I just want to focus on the context. So I'm going to duplicate that. Cut it. So I'm going to remove some things. I'm going to say Felix invites some friends. I'm going to try to say that. That's what happened. I had an extra text box there. Felix invites some friends to his party. Some friends are girls and some friends are boys. Now I'm going to remove that question because I don't want the question just yet. So now we're focusing on the context. What is going on? And you can even see down below the question to ask your students, what's the problem talking about? Now we're going to go to the next part. Paste that information. And I want to have, and you can choose, are you going to have 3 layers or 4? So if I wanted 4, I'll keep one quantity there, but not the rest. So I'm going to take out this 8 friends and I'm going to go back to some friends are boys. And I'm definitely going to want to remove that question. So I started with the context, no numbers. Then I have one of the numbers that are there. Now I'm going to paste that same information here. The only part I'm removing here is the question. So again, we got to what's it about? What's the first quantity? What's the next quantity? What's a math question we could ask? And that's even down below in the questions to ask of your students. And we finish off with the word problem, how it initially started, which is all of the information, all of the quantities, and the question. So again, you use that template that was provided if you wanted to, not that you have to, you already have some that are made to you, available to you, but you can simply just copy and paste so that you can kind of stretch out that reveal to your students. Now, could you make it a little bit more appeasing to the eye? Absolutely. But I wanted you to see how you could potentially go about creating your own if you wanted to. I'm going to stop that share. I'll get back to our presentation and then we'll start to wrap up. Let's see. So our goals, what we were trying to accomplish in our time together is we were trying to look at what makes a task rich. We looked at some problem solving strategies that you might use with regards to numberless word problems, as well as 3 Roots protocol. And we briefly looked at how you might be able to navigate on the math website to find your own that are made for you, or just look at how you could use your textbook to create one for yourself. So I appreciate your engagement and your time. And I want to leave you with this, which is to say, that if you have not yet done a numberless word problem or you haven't done a 3 Roots protocol, you may not be the expert that you want to be yet. And I think that as teachers, we have to place ourselves in the vulnerable positions where we try this and then see how it goes. And it is something that I truly believe helps promote sense making. And it is something that I've seen firsthand how much it helps kiddos better make sense of whatever problems that are in front of them.